In the spring of 1963, a biologist climbed a tall pine tree in the swamps of Florida to check on a bald eagle nest he had been monitoring for years. When he reached it and looked inside, he found something he had seen far too often in recent seasons. The eggs were there, the shells were there, but they were crushed, paper thin, collapsed under the simple weight of the parent bird trying to incubate them. That same year, biologists counted every nesting pair of bald eagles they could find across the lower 48 states. The number they arrived at was 487. 487 nesting pairs for a bird that had once soared over nearly every river, lake, and coastline on the continent. A bird chosen in 1782 as the national symbol of the United States, printed on the presidential seal and stamped on every dollar bill in every American wallet, was fewer than 500 breeding pairs away from disappearing from the country that had made it a symbol of strength and freedom. And almost nobody outside a small circle of biologists understood why. This is that story. Every claim in this video is drawn from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service population surveys and the published scientific record behind one of the most significant environmental interventions in American history. This is the story of a chemical that quietly poisoned an entire food chain for 20 years before anyone connected the pieces, and the fight it took to reverse the damage before it was too late. But first, you need to understand how a bird this dominant, this widespread, this deeply woven into American identity ended up standing at the edge of extinction. Before European settlement, biologists estimate that somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 bald eagles lived across North America, nesting along nearly every major river and coastline from Alaska down through Florida. For the first century and a half of American history, the threats were the ones you would expect. Habitat loss as forests were cleared, direct shooting since eagles were widely viewed by farmers as a threat to livestock, despite feeding almost entirely on fish and carrion, and accidental poisoning from animals killed by lead shot and early pesticides. By the 1940s, the population had fallen sharply enough that Congress passed the Bald Eagle Protection Act in 1940, making it illegal to kill, harm, or disturb the birds or their nests. It should have been the turning point. Instead, an entirely new threat was about to arrive, one far more dangerous than any gun, because almost nobody could see it happening. In 1945, a chemical compound called dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, more commonly known as DDT, was released for widespread civilian and agricultural use. It had been developed during the Second World War to control insect-borne diseases like typhus and malaria among soldiers, and it worked remarkably well. When the war ended, DDT was repurposed almost overnight into one of the most widely used agricultural pesticides in American history, sprayed across farmland, forests, wetlands, and even suburban neighborhoods to control mosquitoes and crop-damaging insects. For nearly 2 decades, it was treated as a near miracle chemical, cheap and extraordinarily effective at killing insects. Nobody understood what it was doing to everything above the insects on the food chain. Here is the mechanism scientists eventually pieced together. DDT sprayed on a field did not simply disappear. It ran off into streams and rivers. Fish absorbed it through their gills and stored it in their fatty tissue, and bald eagles, feeding on those fish over their entire lifespans, allowed the chemical to accumulate in their bodies at increasingly dangerous concentrations, a process called bioaccumulation. Once inside an eagle's system, DDT broke down into a compound that interfered directly with the bird's ability to metabolize calcium, the single most critical ingredient in building a strong egg shell. Female eagles contaminated with DDT could still mate, still lay eggs, and still attempt to incubate them. But the shells were dangerously thin, sometimes so thin that the simple weight of the parent sitting on the nest was enough to crush them before they could hatch. An entire generation of eagles was reproducing normally in every visible way. and failing completely at the one thing that mattered most. In 1962, a marine biologist named Rachel Carson published a book called Silent Spring, laying out in exhaustive detail the damage DDT and similar pesticides were causing throughout the American ecosystem. The chemical industry responded aggressively. Carson was publicly mocked, accused of being hysterical, and dismissed as an alarmist with no real understanding of agricultural science. One major chemical company reportedly threatened legal action against her publisher before the book was even released. Later in this video, you will see exactly how thoroughly her warnings were vindicated. But first, understand just how close the bald eagle came to the point of no return while that argument was still playing out in public. By 1963, biologists studying eagle nests along the Chesapeake Bay, in the Great Lakes region, and along major rivers throughout the country were documenting the same devastating pattern. Nests that appeared occupied and active, adult eagles that appeared healthy, and reproductive failure rates so severe that entire regional populations were simply not replacing themselves. In some of the most heavily contaminated areas, reproductive success dropped low enough that local extinction within a generation or two was a mathematical certainty if nothing changed. The bald eagle was not being hunted to extinction, it was failing to reproduce, silently, nest by nest, across an entire continent because of a chemical most Americans had in their own garden sheds. The turning point came from mounting scientific evidence and a newly formed federal agency willing to act on it. In 1970, the Environmental Protection Agency was established, and one of its earliest actions was ordering a formal scientific review of DDT and its effects on wildlife and human health. The evidence assembled, building directly on Rachel Carson's research, was overwhelming. On June 14, 1972, the Environmental Protection Agency issued a nationwide ban on the agricultural use of DDT, one of the first major regulatory actions of its kind in American history. The following year, Congress passed the Endangered Species Act, and the bald eagle was formally listed as endangered across most of the lower 48 states, triggering federal protections and active recovery efforts nationwide. What happened over the following decades is where this story becomes genuinely remarkable. With DDT no longer entering the food chain, the chemical already present in the environment slowly broke down and flushed out of fish populations, and in turn out of the eagles feeding on them. Eggshells returned to their natural thickness. Reproductive success climbed year over year. Wildlife agencies supplemented the natural recovery with nest protection, breeding and release programs in the hardest-hit regions, and strict monitoring of remaining pairs. The recovery took decades, but it was consistent and it compounded. By 1995, the bald eagle's federal status was upgraded from endangered to threatened. By 2007, the population had recovered enough that it was removed from the federal endangered species list entirely, a moment marked with a formal ceremony in Washington, D.C. As of the most recent nationwide survey, the bald eagle population across the lower 48 states stands at more than 316,000 individual birds, including more than 71,000 nesting pairs. From 487 nesting pairs in 1963 to more than 71,000 today, the bald eagle recovery stands among the most complete reversals of a near extinction ever documented for a large bird of prey anywhere in the world. But the second part of this story is the part almost never mentioned alongside the celebration. The recovery did not happen because of a single dramatic rescue effort or one heroic release program. It happened because an entire class of chemical was removed from the environment nationwide, an intervention so broad it affected not just eagles, but ospreys, peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, and dozens of other species collapsing from the exact same mechanism at the exact same time, largely unnoticed by the public because none of them carried the cultural weight of the national symbol. The bald eagle became the face of the DDT crisis, not because its collapse was unique, but because its collapse was the one the American public could not ignore. Without that particular bird on that particular seal, the ban might have taken years longer to arrive, and several of those other species might not have recovered at all. The third part of this story is what the bald eagle recovery proved about environmental policy more broadly. For nearly 2 decades, the effects of DDT accumulated silently, invisible in day-to-day life, showing up only in crushed eggshells at the top of tall trees almost nobody was climbing to check. The damage was not obvious until scientists went looking for a specific outcome, and even then, the evidence was dismissed for years by industries with a financial interest in ignoring it. The eventual reversal proved that when a clear mechanism is identified and a single source is removed at the national level, even a species reduced to a few hundred breeding pairs can recover to the hundreds of thousands within a single human lifetime. It became the model referenced again and again in the decades that followed whenever biologists needed to argue that a wildlife collapse, however severe, was not necessarily permanent. So here's the whole story in one breath. 487 nesting pairs left in the entire United States by 1963. A chemical released as a wartime miracle that quietly worked its way up the food chain for 2 decades before anyone understood the damage. A scientist mocked and threatened for publishing the warning that turned out to be correct. A nationwide ban issued in 1972, and a species removed from the endangered list by 2007. And a bird that now numbers more than 316,000 individuals across the same 48 states where it had nearly vanished within living memory. The bald eagle did not just survive, it became proof that a species standing at the edge of extinction is not always standing at the end of its story. But the bald eagle was not the only American icon reduced to a number that small. In our next video, we look at a bird even more ancient, a species that watched dinosaurs go extinct and nearly did not survive the 20th century, reduced to just 27 individuals left alive on the entire planet, before biologists made a decision so controversial that some conservationists at the time called it a mistake, capturing every single wild condor left in existence and betting the future of the species on a captive breeding program with no guarantee it would work. If you thought 487 eagles was a low point, wait until you see what it took to save a bird that came down to fewer than 30. You will never look at the American sky the same way again.